It was supposed to be a fun day. The K-9 unit came to Willow Glen Elementary for a school safety presentation. Officers in clean uniforms, kids laughing, dogs showing off tricks. Ellie Monroe sat cross-legged near the front, hugging a worn stuffed rabbit named Clover. She didn't laugh, didn't speak, just watched, quietly. Then something shifted. Cooper, the golden retriever, stopped mid-command. His ears perked, his muscles tensed, and before anyone could blink, he lunged toward Ellie's pink unicorn backpack and tore it open. What fell out wasn't part of any lesson plan. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. Willow Glen, Oregon. Late September. Overcast skies, 61 Dave. The playground at Willow Glen Elementary buzzed with excited chatter as second graders bundled in light fall jackets clustered along the school's back lawn. The clouds hung thick and low, the air still scented faintly of wet bark and damp leaves. A crisp breeze stirred loose papers taped to the chain-link fence. It was safety week, and today's highlight was the much-anticipated demonstration from the Willow Glen Police K-9 unit. Officer Grace Whitman stood at the edge of the pavement, one hand resting gently on the golden head of her K-9 partner, Cooper. At 6 years old, Cooper was a golden retriever, with a broad chest, thick sun-kissed fur, and eyes the color of warm amber. Unlike the more rigid, aggressive K-9s typically deployed in narcotics or apprehension, Cooper was trained for emotional support, search and rescue, and trauma detection. His gait was smooth and his demeanor impossibly gentle, yet beneath that softness was a history that made Grace trust him with her life. Grace herself was in her early 40s, tall and lean, her uniform pressed but never flashy. Her dark auburn hair was pulled back into a no-nonsense ponytail. A scar above her right temple hinted at a past injury unspoken, but never forgotten. 2 years ago, she'd lost her daughter in a car crash caused by a drunk driver. That wound hadn't closed, not really. But working with Cooper, connecting with children, teaching them about safety, had become the closest thing she had to breathing easier. The children sat in rows on the concrete, giggling and fidgeting as Officer Terry, a stockier man in his 50s with a warm voice and a fondness for dad jokes, demonstrated commands with another K-9 named Duke. "Sit," he said with a grin, and Duke obeyed, tail thumping. The children clapped. Grace gave Cooper a soft pat. "Ready, boy?" she whispered. Cooper didn't respond with a bark or a wag. Instead, his ears pricked, his nose lifted slightly, nostrils flaring. Grace followed his gaze. A girl stood apart from the group. Ellie Monroe, 8 years old, second grade, known to most teachers as the quiet one. She had thin arms and long, straw-colored hair tied into a loose braid with a purple ribbon. Her jeans were worn at the knees, her sleeves a bit too short. A butterfly-shaped backpack in faded pink clung to her shoulders. Ellie wasn't popular, but she wasn't invisible either. She spoke when spoken to, never caused trouble, and often clutched a stuffed cat named Whiskers, even during lunch. Most people mistook her silence for shyness. But Cooper, he saw something else. Without warning, he yanked forward. The leash slipped from Grace's hand as he bolted toward Ellie. In an instant, the calm broke like shattered glass. Screams erupted from the children. A teacher shouted, "Back, stay back!" Grace lunged after him, heart slamming against her ribs. Cooper didn't lunge at Ellie. He didn't bark at her. He lunged at the backpack. With one powerful motion, he jumped up, jaws locking around the fabric. The unicorn wings on the bag tore apart. Ellie froze, her small body stiff as a tree trunk, lips parted, but no sound coming out. The tearing noise echoed sharply, surreal against the stunned silence. Plastic wrappers and a juice box tumbled onto the concrete. A plush rabbit, no, a cat hit the ground. But what stopped everyone cold was a folded, brittle envelope, speckled with something dark and rusty red. Cooper nudged it gently with his nose and stepped back. Ms. Halbrook Ellie's homeroom teacher was the first adult to move. Late 30s, average height, always with a cardigan draped over her shoulders. She was known for being patient, especially with students who didn't speak much. She stepped forward, trembling, and knelt beside the envelope. She picked it up slowly. Her lips parted. The envelope tore in her hand, the paper inside already frayed at the edges. It unfolded almost on its own, revealing childish handwriting, uneven, crooked, but readable. If you're reading this, I might already be gone. The color drained from Ms. Halbrook's face. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed to the blacktop unconscious. Chaos rippled again. Officer Terry sprinted forward, calling for backup and the nurse. Grace dropped beside Cooper, one hand on his collar, the other scanning Ellie. The girl still hadn't moved. Her eyes, large and glassy, stared at the torn backpack. Grace looked at Cooper, who now sat obediently beside Ellie, his head slightly tilted, watching her like she was the most important thing in the world. The rain had started by the time they brought Ellie Monroe into the nurse's office. It came in soft waves, tapping the wide window like a patient knocking. The sky over Willow Glen had sunk into a dull slate gray, heavy with the weight of late September. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting pale halos over the sterile room. Ellie sat on the edge of the cot, her feet not touching the floor. Her pink sneakers, frayed at the toes, dangled quietly above the tile. She clutched a small stuffed cat, gray and threadbare, to her chest with one hand. The other rested limply in her lap. Her face pale as morning fog remained still, no tears, no trembling, no reaction. Her large, sea-glass-colored eyes stared forward unfocused, as if watching something no one else could see. Officer Grace Whitman stood just a few feet away, her uniform damp at the shoulders, one hand resting lightly on the head of Cooper, the golden retriever, who hadn't left Ellie's side since the incident. Cooper was calm now, his body still, his eyes fixed on Ellie, the way a lighthouse watches a storm, steadfast, unwavering. His thick golden coat was brushed and clean, but flecks of mud still clung to his paws from the playground. He didn't nudge Ellie or paw at her. He simply waited. Grace took a small step forward and crouched to the girl's eye level. She kept her voice soft. "Ellie, I'm Officer Grace. That's Cooper. He's a very smart dog. He helps kids who feel scared or confused. He doesn't need you to talk, he just listens. Nothing." Ellie's eyes blinked once. Not at Grace. At Cooper. Cooper's tail gave a single subtle thump against the floor. There was a knock at the door. Grace stood and turned as it opened. A woman stepped in, carrying a thick sketchbook tucked beneath one arm. She wore a loose linen blouse streaked with faded paint and olive corduroy pants. Her red hair, pulled into a half knot, framed a soft, thoughtful face. Her name was Rachel Bennett, the art teacher at Willow Glen Elementary. Rachel was in her early 30s, slight in frame, with kind, observant eyes behind wire-framed glasses. She walked with the posture of someone who had grown used to leaning down to children's level. Known among students as Miss Rachel, she had a reputation for never raising her voice, always giving space and remembering every child's favorite color. She also noticed things others missed, especially when those things came out in the quiet language of art. Officer Whitman Rachel greeted gently, nodding toward the girl. "I heard what happened. "Thought I should bring this." She held up the sketchbook. Grace stepped forward and took it carefully. "What am I looking at?" Rachel flipped to a marked page. This was from last week's free drawing session. We were exploring dreams, and I gave them prompts about safe places. She didn't need to say it. Ellie's drawing had clearly gone another direction. The page showed a dark scribble of crayon lines, black and red, layered heavy over each other. In the center was a small childlike figure, with long hair standing in the corner of a box-like room. Towering behind her was a tall, faceless figure. No eyes, no nose, just a mouth, wide, jagged, stretched across where the face should have been drawn in red pencil again and again until the paper had worn thin beneath it. Next to the figure were words, rough, all caps, barely legible, "Be good or else." No telling. And below that, as if whispered in graphite, "He makes me smile." Grace's jaw tightened. Rachel exhaled slowly. This wasn't an isolated piece. Ellie's been drawing variations of that figure for weeks. Always the same tall, no face, long mouth. The words change a little, but they all say the same thing. Grace turned to look at Ellie again. The girl hadn't moved. Cooper, now lying down beside her, shifted only slightly, his nose brushing her sneaker. "I didn't think much of it at first," Rachel admitted. "Lots of kids use art to vent fears, especially with all the spooky stuff they read or see. But now," Grace nodded slowly, "now it looks like a warning." Rachel hesitated, then leaned in. "There's one more thing." She flipped forward in the sketchbook to another page. This one was simpler. No figures, just a door. Red. Thick lines, almost angry. Under it, written in crooked handwriting, "I'm quiet, he likes that." Ellie's hand twitched at the edge of the cot. Rachel placed the sketchbook on the nearby table and stepped back, voice hushed. "She's never said a word to me but this. This is how she's been speaking all along." Grace didn't reply. She looked down at Cooper, who gave her a brief glance, then returned his gaze to Ellie. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the rain against the glass. Then, without a word, Ellie reached out and placed one hand, small, trembling, on Cooper's head. Her fingers curled slightly in his fur. She still didn't cry. She didn't speak. But she didn't need to. Cooper leaned into the touch, closing his eyes. And for the first time since the siren bark on the playground, Ellie moved closer to someone instead of further away. By the time Officer Grace Whitman pulled her cruiser up the cracked driveway of 92 Maple Hollow Lane, the rain had eased into a mist. The house was a one-story rental on the edge of Willow Glen's older district. A sagging porch, chipped blue shutters, and a yard overgrown with matted grass and stubborn blackberry vines. The kind of place that didn't get second glances, the kind no one missed when it was vacated. Ellie Monroe had lived here with her family until about 6 months ago. Grace stepped out and clicked her tongue once. Cooper leapt down beside her tail, high but quiet nose twitching in the damp air. He took in the scent of the yard with the practiced precision of a dog who had done this before. His fur, slightly darker now from the drizzle, clung to his sides in ripples. He was calm, alert, his breath fogging briefly in the cool autumn air. Grace checked the address again on her notepad. Ellie hadn't spoken much after her last sketch in the nurse's office, but she had drawn another picture later that afternoon, this time a tree. Large, sweeping branches, a wooden box underneath. Scribbled above it, "Daddy's song lives here." Rachel Bennett had confirmed the tree, a willow. It used to stand in the backyard of Ellie's previous home. And so Grace had filed the request, gotten the temporary access permit, and driven out here with Cooper and a shovel in the trunk. They walked around the back boots, squishing in the wet earth. The tree stood just past a collapsed section of fence, its massive limbs still bent as if in mourning. Grace had always loved willows. They were the kind of trees that looked like they carried secrets. Today she hoped that was true. She surveyed the ground beneath the thickest root cluster, then pointed to the base. "There, Coop! You smell anything?" Cooper circled once, sniffed, then gave a low whine. His paw scraped gently at a spot just between two roots. Grace crouched, pulled on a pair of gloves, and began to dig. The soil was wet and loose, and within minutes her fingers brushed something hard. She cleared away the mud carefully, and a small wooden box emerged, weathered corners, split but intact. No lock. She opened the lid slowly. Inside was a music box carved with little stars and faded swirls. A silver chain lay coiled beside it, tarnished but still shining faintly. The pendant was simple oval, engraved with the name Jonathan Monroe. Underneath the chain, folded twice, was a water-damaged piece of notepaper. Grace unfolded it carefully, brushing mud from the ink-smudged words. "He's not my uncle. He's not nice. And Daddy didn't leave because he wanted to." Her throat tightened. There was a sound behind her twigs, snapping. Grace turned quickly, hand on her belt. A man stood at the edge of the fence line, wearing a hooded windbreaker and jeans darkened with rain. He looked about 30, maybe a bit older, lean frame, scruffy brown beard, and a baseball cap pulled low. He had the posture of someone used to being overlooked. He raised a hand, palms out. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said. "I live next door. Saw your cruiser." "Everything all right?" Grace relaxed slightly. "Police business. Name Ethan Collier," he said. "Been here 4 years. I remember the folks who lived there before. The little girl. Ellie, right?" Grace nodded. Ethan's face darkened. She was a quiet kid, polite. Used to play under that tree a lot, always alone. Her stepmom, though, bit of a ghost. And the guy who came around sometimes, her uncle, gave me the creeps. Never talked, just stared a lot. Late at night. Car pulled in real slow. "You ever report anything?" Grace asked. Ethan hesitated. "No, I didn't have anything concrete, just bad vibes. But I never saw the dad, just pictures. Heard he left or something." Grace showed him the pendant. Ethan squinted. "That's him? Jonathan. I remember seeing him once with her, a long time ago." She thanked him and gave him her card just in case. When he disappeared around the fence, Grace looked back at the box in her hands. Cooper was sitting now, watching the tree still and unmoving. She turned the key on the side of the music box. It stuttered at first, then played a soft, haunting melody, 3 notes repeated like a lullaby. Grace closed her eyes for a second. The music was fragile, broken in places. But even in its damage, it carried love. They drove back in silence, the box and chain sealed in a bag beside her, Cooper resting in the passenger seat, one paw occasionally twitching as if in a dream. At the station, she made her report. The pendant matched Jonathan Monroe, Ellie's biological father, reported as having abandoned the family over a year ago. No forwarding address, no death certificate, no legal trace. Grace filed the note and requested a review of Jonathan's case history. Something about it felt wrong, like someone had erased him deliberately. Later that night, she brought the music box to Ellie at Rachel Bennett's classroom, where the girl had been staying late, drawing under supervision. Rachel stood in the corner, watching with quiet eyes as Grace set the box on the table. Ellie looked at it, her hands frozen in mid-sketch. Grace opened the lid. The music played. Ellie's eyes widened. Her lower lip trembled just slightly. Grace said nothing. Cooper came forward and lay at Ellie's feet. The girl reached out, fingers brushing the pendant. "He used to sing that," she whispered. Grace crouched. Ellie looked down. Daddy. "And the man who lives with you now?" Grace asked softly. Ellie's fingers curled tight around the chain. "He told me Daddy left us because I was bad." Rachel stepped forward slowly. "That's not true, Ellie." "I know," the girl said, barely audible. The sky hung heavy with the weight of gray clouds as Officer Grace Whitman stepped out of her cruiser in front of the house on Pine Ridge Drive. It was Ellie Monroe's current residence, an aging single-story home with peeling paint and a chain-link fence that sagged inward as if the house itself had given up. The grass was overgrown, the porch light broken, and the windows were sealed behind drawn yellowing blinds. Cooper stepped out beside her, his golden fur slightly damp from the drizzle. His ears were forward, tail still, and every part of his body quietly alert. Grace glanced down at him. He was already reading the air. Inside the house was dim and cold. No television sounds, no scent of cooking, just silence and the faint underlying odor of old bleach and mildew. Grace moved carefully through the small front hallway, her boots clicking lightly against the wood floor. The living room was barely furnished, an old couch with torn cushions, a lamp with no shade, and a fireplace near the back wall. She paused by the hearth. Something didn't sit right. The bricks above the fireplace had recently been patched, and the rug in front of it, an ugly, faded thing with fraying edges, seemed deliberately placed. Grace crouched, peeled it back, and found exactly what she suspected, a wood panel newer than the rest of the floor fastened with mismatched screws. Cooper let out a low chuff beside her, then gently placed a paw on the panel. Grace gave him a slow nod, then retrieved a screwdriver from her belt. It took only a few minutes to pry the panel open. A wave of cold, damp air rose to meet her. Beneath the floor was a crawl space, shallow but wide enough to hold a small body. She turned on her flashlight and peered down. There, pushed against one side of the space, was a thin, stained folding mattress. A broken doll, missing one eye and both arms, lay abandoned on top of it, its plastic face scratched. Near it, partially buried in the dirt, was a piece of children's clothing, a small T-shirt with a faded butterfly design. Grace reached in, careful not to disturb anything, and gently bagged the item for evidence. Cooper watched silently from above his breath, steady. The space hadn't been used recently, but it had been used. She stood slowly, heart heavy with the realization that Ellie had likely been kept there, or worse, had witnessed others being sent there. Back at the station that afternoon, Deputy Mike Landry stood beside a corkboard covered in pinned reports photos and printed rosters. He was tall and wiry, in his early 50s, with deep lines around his mouth and brow that suggested both skepticism and compassion. A career investigator, Mike had seen his share of tragedies, but what he was uncovering now disturbed even him. Grace entered the room holding the evidence bag. Mike didn't turn around. He pointed to 3 school yearbooks pinned in a column. 3 missing students from 3 different towns, he said. Lincoln Falls, Brookdale, and Eastgate. Grace frowned. No connection between them. "There is now," he said, tapping each photo. Each of them was temporarily enrolled at Willow Glen Elementary in the last 2 years. Short stints, few months each. On paper it looks like foster transfers, but I dug deeper. The paperwork's thin, too thin. One of them doesn't even have a withdrawal date. Grace stared at the board, then at the bag in her hand, the child's shirt. "They were all here," she said quietly, "right under our noses." Cooper sat beside her, watching both officers in silence, as if he already knew the full truth. His tail swept once across the floor. The early afternoon sun cut through the clouds just enough to cast long, uneven shadows across the overgrown field behind the abandoned greenhouse. It was an outlier property tucked beyond the official borders of Willow Glen, and just inside a forgotten zone of undeveloped lots and tax-lost land. No address markers, no mailbox. And as Grace Whitman had confirmed, no trace of it in official county housing records for the last 7 years. Ellie had mentioned it quietly that morning while sipping orange juice at Rachel Bennett's classroom table. The one with the broken swing, she'd whispered, where the windows were green. Grace had gently asked if she could draw it instead. Ellie had, with a precision that sent chills up Grace's spine, every pane of glass, every crack in the porch, every vine creeping up the railing and the crooked swing that hung from rusted chains. Now Grace stood outside the structure itself, arms folded, Cooper at her side. The building was mostly glass, old greenhouse-style panels surrounded by warped wood siding, many windows cracked or shattered. The swing Ellie had drawn was real, exactly where she'd placed it, creaking slowly in the breeze, one chain hanging lower than the other. "Let's see what you smell, Buddy," Grace murmured. Cooper's tail gave a soft flick, then his nose dipped low to the ground. He moved slowly, methodically, around the side of the greenhouse, under the broken fencing, and toward a thick old oak tree that stood about 20 feet away. Its roots jutted from the ground like ancient knuckles splitting the earth. Cooper stopped. He sniffed once, then began to paw at the base. Grace crouched and began digging gently with a trowel she'd brought for exactly this. The dirt was dry and light, but packed with roots. Just beneath the surface, something hard clicked against metal. A small tin box. She wiped it off and pried it open. Inside was a spiral-bound sketchbook, swollen with moisture but mostly intact. She flipped carefully through the pages. The drawings were crude, unpolished, but unmistakably desperate. Children. Always children. Stick figures with terrified expressions, most with hands bound, some with their mouths sewn shut in red crayon. One had large X's over the eyes. Another page showed a child hiding under a table while looming behind them was a familiar silhouette. A tall, adult figure with no face and an impossibly wide mouth drawn in scratchy, repeated lines. On the last page, the child had written in shaky handwriting, "He says, if we don't smile, we disappear like Lucy." Grace's throat tightened. She took a picture of every page and sealed the sketchbook into a plastic evidence bag. Just as she turned back toward the greenhouse, a car door slammed. She turned, instinctively resting her hand near her holstered sidearm. A woman approached, mid-30s, short bob of ash-brown hair, oversized beige hoodie, thin frame. She had a cautious, clipped gait and a half-apologetic expression, like someone who had learned to make herself small in rooms. Her name was Melissa Grant, a former administrative aide at Willow Glen Elementary, now listed as voluntarily resigned 6 months ago. Grace had pulled her name out of a folder last night after spotting it on a withdrawn student transfer form, one of the cases Mike had flagged. "You weren't supposed to find this place," Melissa said, her voice tight. Grace didn't move. "And yet you're here." "I check on it sometimes," she said. "Make sure it hasn't burned down or been sold off." "I didn't think anyone remembered it." "You mean anyone official?" Melissa glanced at the ground, then at Cooper, who stood between them silently, golden body, still like a statue. Grace held up the evidence bag. "You know who drew these?" Melissa nodded once reluctantly. "Sophie. She was 9. Came through the system fast, 2 homes in 6 months. Last one placed her at Willow Glen." "Where is she now?" Melissa looked away. "She disappeared last year. No records, no reports. Just gone." Grace took a step forward. "And this house, it wasn't part of the school?" "Not officially," Melissa said, "but it was used.
I didn't ask by who. I just filed the transfers and closed the folders. I didn't know what else to do. Why not come forward? Melissa's lips quivered slightly. Because I was told if I said anything I'd lose more than my job. And I believed them. Cooper growled low, barely a sound, but enough to make Melissa freeze. Grace lowered her voice.
You can make it right now. Talk to me. Talk to the state. This isn't just misfiled paperwork. These are missing children. Melissa looked at the tin box. She buried that herself. She said, "If someone finds this, they'll know I was real." Later that evening, Grace returned to the station with the sketchbook and a full report. Rachel Bennett came by as Grace was reviewing the drawings. She looked at the pages for only a few seconds before her face changed.
"This isn't Ellie's,"
Rachel said. "I'd know her lines anywhere. This one was from someone else. A girl named Sophie Brandt. She stopped coming to art club last fall. No warning, no transfer notice. The other kids just said she moved again." Grace nodded grimly. She didn't. The east wing of Willow Glen Elementary was colder than the rest of the building, as if it had been left out of time. The walls were painted the same faded eggshell white as the other halls, but here the linoleum tiles curled at the edges, and the ceiling lights flickered with a tired hum. The rest of the school was lively with morning chatter and footsteps, but this stretch remained quiet, too quiet. Officer Grace Whitman walked beside Cooper, her golden retriever K9 partner, her boots making measured taps against the worn floor. She held a floor plan printout of the building, checked it once more, then glanced up. Something wasn't right. According to the blueprint, the hallway ended at room 3C and a janitor's closet. But ahead, tucked between two utility doors, was a plain beige door with no room number, no label, and no sign of use. Dust lined the frame. The doorknob showed no fingerprints. Cooper stopped. He sniffed once, twice, then walked directly to the mystery door and sat down. His tail curled beside him, and his eyes locked onto Grace's. "You sure?" she whispered. Cooper thumped his tail once against the floor. Grace pushed gently on the handle. It didn't budge. She pulled out a master key given to her by the school district's facilities manager and tried one by one. On the fourth attempt, there was a soft click. The door creaked open. The smell hit her immediately, musty, dry, and old, like forgotten paper and shut-in air. She turned on the light. The single overhead bulb flickered, then steadied. Inside was a narrow, rectangular room, no more than 15 feet long, with a small boarded-up window on the far end. 6 desks sat arranged in 2 rows, each one with a mismatched chair. Along the wall to the right was a stack of old textbooks and children's backpacks, dusty and dulled with time. In the far corner, rolled sleeping bags were piled against the wall. Some still had cartoon characters printed on them, faded superheroes. A smiling bear. Cooper stepped inside first, nose low to the ground, moving carefully. He paused at the center of the room and let out a soft, throaty whine. Grace moved toward the left wall. Pinned haphazardly to it were several sheets of construction paper, all drawings. Childlike, crude. Most were just scribbles. But one stood out, a page torn from a notebook taped in the center. It showed 3 children standing in a hallway. Their faces were round with large eyes, and their small bodies were huddled together in what appeared to be shadow. Behind them was a tall adult figure, featureless, looming drawn with thick black strokes. Across the top of the page, written in jagged letters that cut into the paper, were the words, "When she leaves, stay quiet. He comes then." Grace stared at it for a long time. Cooper sat down at her feet, not making a sound. The precinct air was still when Officer Grace Whitman stepped into the records division that afternoon, the thick hum of fluorescent lights echoing faintly overhead. The silt-gray folder in her hand was creased with age, labeled with a name she had stared at all night, Jonathan Monroe. But it wasn't what the file said that troubled her. It was what it didn't. No forwarding address, no exit signature, no hospital record. Just a sudden stop in every trace of a man who had, by all accounts, once loved his daughter deeply. She placed the folder on the counter and turned to the woman seated at the adjoining terminal, Marla Finch, the department's records archivist. Marla was in her late 50s, stout and steel-eyed, with a tightly coiled bun and a cardigan for every season. She had a voice that carried authority even in whispers, and a memory sharp enough to recall badge numbers from 20 years prior. "I need cross-reference access," Grace said. "Full state background on a Lucas Briggs, possibly listed under juvenile or sealed criminal proceedings." Marla raised a brow. "Relation linked to a missing child case. Possible alias." Marla tapped quickly. The screen flickered, then loaded slowly. "Briggs," she muttered, scrolling. "Lucas, Nathan Briggs, born 1987, sealed minor charges, later unsealed. Let's see. Oh." Her voice changed. "Here." The screen filled with scanned images, court dockets, mugshots, and case summaries. One image showed a younger man, wiry build, narrow shoulders, sunken cheeks, and eyes that somehow felt far older than the face surrounding them. His lips were pulled in a thin line. The caption beneath read, "Charges unlawful restraint of a minor. Suspended sentence. Year 2011. County Jackson." Grace leaned in. "Is there an Amanda Monroe listed as emergency contact?" Marla squinted. "Not in this file, but—" "Wait." She clicked again. "Connected residential address. Shared residence listed twice, one under Amanda Briggs. Maiden name." Grace's breath caught. Amanda Monroe, Ellie's stepmother, had been Amanda Briggs. And Lucas wasn't Ellie's uncle by coincidence. He was Amanda's younger brother. "Can you run household co-occupancy searches for the last 5 years?" Grace asked, her voice tightening. Marla nodded, adjusting her glasses. "Brace yourself." The screen lit up with a chain of addresses all across different districts and counties, 6 properties in total, all under either Amanda Monroe, Amanda Briggs, or Lucas Briggs. Each stay lasted only months, each tied to a school district where a child had later been reported missing. Grace stared at the pattern. It wasn't coincidence. It was movement. And in every place a new child vanished, never traced back to them. She stepped out of the records room and called Deputy Mike Landry, who was already chasing his own leads. He picked up immediately. "Grace, Mike, I've got it. Lucas Briggs is Amanda's brother. They've been using her guardianship status as a cover, posing as foster or temporary guardians and enrolling Ellie as the legitimate child. Every district they move into, another child disappears." Mike's voice dropped. "God, they're not just hiding her. They're using her as a shield." That night, Grace returned to Willow Glen Elementary not to patrol, but to meet with Rachel Bennett. They sat in the art room, the soft light overhead casting golden shadows on the paper-littered floor. Ellie was at the back of the room, with Cooper curled against him on a beanbag chair, her sketchbook open across her knees. Grace showed Rachel the photo of Lucas Briggs' mugshot. Rachel froze. "He was here," she whispered. "That man. He delivered something a few months ago. Said he was with maintenance. I thought. I didn't think to ask. He didn't look dangerous." Grace nodded grimly. "That's the point." Rachel lowered her voice. "Do you think Ellie knows? She might not have known who he was, but I think she felt it." Rachel stood and walked over to Ellie. She crouched beside the girl gently. "Sweetheart, "Do you remember this man?" she asked, showing her the picture. Ellie didn't respond at first. Then she looked at Cooper, who met her eyes. After a long moment, she nodded.
"That's the man who goes quiet when Mommy isn't home," she whispered. "He says the quiet is safer." Grace stepped forward. "Did he ever hurt you?" Ellie shook her head but added, "He scared Whiskers." "Your stuffed cat?" Ellie nodded. "He said, 'Whiskers listens too much.'" Rachel looked at Grace, a chill passing between them. The following morning, Child Protective Services began formal proceedings to remove Ellie from Amanda Monroe's custody. When Amanda was brought in for questioning, she folded quickly, not with panic but with exhaustion. "He said we were saving them," she murmured through cracked lips. "He said the system forgot kids like those." "And you believed him?" Grace asked. Amanda looked up with hollow eyes. "I believed that no one would care if they went missing." She was charged with obstruction endangering the welfare of a minor and conspiracy to traffic children across district lines. Lucas Briggs, however, was not at the house. He had vanished. But Grace had already issued a statewide alert, and Cooper he hadn't stopped searching the air for his scent. The morning of the ceremony dawned with a kind of stillness that didn't feel like silence, but reverence. The courthouse lawn in Willow Glen had been cleared for the event. Rows of folding chairs lined the grass, a small wooden stage raised at the center. The fall leaves shimmered gold and crimson in the wind, and the town for once was quiet, not out of fear, but out of respect. Officer Grace Whitman stood near the edge of the crowd, her posture straight in full uniform, her gaze tracking every motion around the perimeter with quiet diligence. Her hair, tied in a tighter-than-usual braid, had gone slightly silver at the temples over the last year, though no one dared to say it. Beside her sat Cooper, golden fur gleaming in the sunlight, K9 service vest pressed clean against his chest, and a calm stillness to him that made him appear less like a dog and more like a monument. The mayor, a round man named Gerald Hooks, with kind eyes and a loud tie, stood behind the podium. He adjusted the microphone with a nervous tap and smiled at the crowd of local officials, school teachers, families, and news reporters. "We're gathered here today," he began, "not just to honor a K9 officer, but to acknowledge the voice of a child and the dog who heard what no one else would." From the third row, Rachel Bennett squeezed Ellie Monroe's hand gently. Rachel, still in her soft earth-toned clothes and loosely tied scarf, had taken to motherhood more naturally than she ever imagined. Her once paint-smudged sleeves now bore the traces of juice spills and late-night coloring sessions. She had always been calm, but now she carried something quieter in her eyes, protective, knowing, permanent. Ellie sat beside her in a sky-blue dress with tiny stitched clouds along the hem. Her hair was brushed back, two loose braids framing her small face. Around her neck hung a silver chain, faintly tarnished but unmistakable. Jonathan Monroe's pendant. Her father's. She hadn't let go of it since the day Grace returned it to her. The ceremony continued. Sheriff Walden read a citation for valor, and the school principal, Mrs. Calloway, offered a few words about community healing. Then Mayor Hooks gestured to the side of the stage. "We have one more speaker," he said, "and she's braver than anyone I know." Rachel gave Ellie a soft nudge. The little girl stood. There was a beat of hesitation, but then she stepped forward, her black flats crunching lightly over fallen leaves. She climbed the steps alone. The crowd quieted. Cooper raised his head. Ellie took the podium, her small hands barely reaching the microphone. A technician hurried over to lower it, and she nodded politely in thanks. Then she cleared her throat, lips parting just slightly. "I used to think," she said, voice soft but steady, "that if I stayed quiet, no one could hurt me. There was no wind, no birdsong, just her. Because when you're scared, people don't always listen. And sometimes when you cry, they call it drama, or say you're too sensitive. So I stopped saying anything, She looked toward the front row. Cooper sat up now, eyes locked on her ears perked as if bracing for a command she didn't even know she'd give. But Cooper Ellie said, her voice cracking just once he heard anyway. Even when I didn't say a word, he listened to the part of me I was too afraid to let out. She reached up and gently touched the pendant. I kept this because it reminded me someone once loved me loud enough to sing to me. And now I keep it because someone else listened to me when I had no song left. Her voice lowered to a whisper, and yet everyone heard it. Cooper is not just a hero, he's a listener. And sometimes that's braver than barking. She stepped back. No one clapped right away. There was no need. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was sacred. Then someone stood, and then another. The crowd rose to its feet in unison, quiet applause echoing like waves against the shore. Cooper barked once, just once, and that was enough. The medal was presented shortly after. It was a silver and blue insignia engraved with his name, Officer Cooper K-9 Unit, Service Above Sound. Grace leaned down to clip it onto his vest. "You earned this, buddy," she whispered. Cooper licked her hand once, then trotted toward Ellie, settling beside her again, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. That evening, back at Rachel's small cottage with its sun-warmed porch and newly fixed swing, Ellie lay curled under a quilt on the living room floor, Cooper beside her tail twitching in sleep. The TV flickered low in the background, some cartoon she wasn't paying attention to. She was sketching again this time, a picture of the stage, the trees, the crowd, and at the center, a dog with a medal and a little girl beside him. She colored his fur extra golden. Rachel, sitting nearby with a mug of tea and the school directory spread open on her lap, smiled softly. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. Ellie had started to laugh more now. Not loudly, not often, but honestly. And not because anyone told her to, but because she chose to. Because the bark that saved her life had become a voice. Her own. Sometimes the loudest cries are the ones never spoken. Ellie's story reminds us that silence can be both a shield and a prison, and that miracles often come in quiet forms. Not every angel has wings. Some have fur-gentle eyes, and a bark that knows when to speak for the voiceless. Cooper wasn't just a dog. He was a vessel of God's grace. A reminder that even in the darkest corners where fear grows in silence and children feel forgotten, God still sends his messengers. Through instinct, loyalty, and love, Cooper listened when no one else did. And through that listening, healing began. Maybe you know a child like Ellie. Maybe you've been someone like Ellie, afraid to speak, unsure if anyone would listen. Let this story remind you, God hears even the unspoken prayers. He places the right people and sometimes the right animals in our path exactly when we need them. In your everyday life, take a moment to really listen to your children, your students, your neighbors, even to yourself. There might be a silent voice nearby waiting to be heard. And if you're the one holding silence, remember your voice matters. You matter. And someone, somewhere, is listening. If this story touched your heart, please comment Amen below as a prayer for all the children still waiting to be heard. Share this story with someone who needs hope. Tell us what this story meant to you in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true stories of faith, courage, and healing. May God bless you and those you love. Keep listening. Keep believing.